Hi, folks. This is Dr. Rob Cywes, the Carb Addiction Doc. And as most of you know, I'm a bariatric surgeon. So, what the hell does a bariatric surgeon know about psychology? Completely homegrown. I haven't done a psychology course since I was at university. That was early 1980s. So, it's been a while. It's been a day. I know nothing about psychology from books from learned people. But I've had to learn about psychology, about human psychology, if I am going to help my patients to effectively beat their addiction to carbohydrates, and in so doing, lose weight, get rid of their type 2 diabetes and their metabolic syndrome. And one of the things that I've come to understand, and it is so very important in terms of how I interact with my patients. And for those of you that have been patients of mine or have worked with me over the last 20 years, hopefully you've seen a tremendous transformation, an evolution, and an improvement of how I interact and how we interact with our patients. And it's come from this understanding. First of all, you've got to understand, I'm a fat guy. So I'm as screwed up over here as every other addict. There's a reason why I'm a fat guy. It's a vulnerability to addictive behavior. So a large part of this is introspective, knowing who I am and then seeing how I interact and who other people are. And the way we look at different personalities, you can't read in this in a book. It's not written down. No psychologist has ever done what I'm about to share with you now. It's just my insights over 20 years and over 30,000 people that we've interacted with. I really look at people from two different perspectives. The way I look at a human being psychologically is that we all have a facade. The facade is that wall that we have around us that protects us or interfaces with everybody else. It's the show we put on for other people. And it very often misrepresents who we believe we actually are. And the poorer our internal belief is of who we actually are, the more diabolically different the facade is to the actual belief of who we are. So we've got this facade that faces outward, that other people interact with, other people see. It's the show we put on for others. And on the inside, we've got what I call the core. And the core is our belief in ourselves. And the core is very simple. It's binary. It's either strong or it's weak. And it can be strengthening or weakening, but the core is either strong or weak, and that is established at a very young age. Perhaps even in the first 1 to 2 years of life, it is established by how our parents treat us. And by definition, anybody that has a vulnerability to addictive behavior has a weak core. Okay? Because a strong core comes from self-confidence and self-esteem that is built and maintained in tiny little increments all the time by being proud of what we do. So we have to do it, and then we have to feel the pride without any contamination to have a strong core. And someone with a strong core has pretty close to a zero likelihood or zero vulnerability to addictive behavior. So my group of patients all come in with a weak or an eroded core. Okay, now, the more eroded or the weaker that core is, the harder and the more diabolically intense the facade has to be. Because when we think of ourselves as not being good enough, we need to have this wonderful facade that interacts with other people. And there are three facades that we encounter. The first facade, the most obvious to me, because I am this person, is what I call the hardcore personality. And that's where the facade is this huge wall. It's this thick steel curtain that we build around ourselves. It's inflexible and impenetrable, and people just bounce off us. Because the hardcore person really doesn't want people to see how weak they truly believe they are, but they want people to really see how wonderful they are. These are the perfectionists. These are typically the authoritarian people, and at its worst, these are people that have narcissistic behavior. And we use that facade to get other people to see how shiny and how beautiful we are, Okay? Think of narcissists looking into a pond of water and looking at this wonderful, perfect image of themselves, and then there's a ripple in the facade, in that pond, that disturbs that image. So you're continuously trying to buff that image, whether it's with fact or falsehood, trying to buff that image, make it shiny so other people think wonderfully of you, and you cannot tolerate imperfection or the thought that other people might think of you as less than perfect. That's the narcissistic facade, but it comes in various degrees. And that hardcore facade is designed to get people to bounce off. So guess what? Nobody ever gets to know you as a person. Now, you may shine it so that they like you, the likability factor may be good, but ultimately, you prefer to be by yourself. You are best when you're alone, because when you're alone, you don't need the protection of that facade. And the coolest thing is, as I work with my authoritarian patients, as I work with my hardcore patients, as in little increments, their self-esteem and their self-confidence builds up, the walls of that hardcore facade soften, and they don't need that wall of protection anymore because they're comfortable with their own mediocrity. They're comfortable being human. That hardcore facade is a facade of perfectionism because of how weak we are on the inside. And the harder that hardcore is, and within 2 seconds of meeting somebody, you can assign them to that category, that hardcore category. The second group are what I call the mushies. Now, the mushies have this veil of a facade. There's really nothing there. The way I came up with that is the prince, or that king, who had the people make his clothes for him, but there were really no clothes, and he was naked on the horse, and everybody adored him and loved. Well, those are people, and the mushy people, and they're always weak when they're addicted. They come in and they just, woe is me, I'm this horrible person. And you can see exactly who they are. You tread all over them. You can walk all over them. There's an amoeba quality to them, a lack of skeleton, a lack of structure, a lack of, it's a soft person. And there is no wall. So they get stepped on, they get abused, they get used, they're self-sacrificing all the time. They're just mushy. And the coolest thing is when those people start to get that backbone. So, but by the way, the mushies also prefer to be by themselves because then they're free of abuse. They're free of getting stepped on. And they're much happier by themselves doing their own little things. But as they get confidence, as they start to build that up, and as they start to develop this protective facade, as they strengthen up, they don't need a big wall around them because they start believing in who they are. And they don't need that protection anymore because their core strengthens. And it's the coolest thing to see a mushy strengthen, to see them get a degree of structure and a skeleton around them. And they tend to be more on the permissive side. The hardcores tend to be authoritarian. The mushies tend to be more permissive, woe is me. And they need someone to hold their hand. When they can start holding their own hand, it's the coolest evolution. It's to see the caterpillar turn into a butterfly. It is, for me, just the coolest transformation. And the third category, the most difficult one to recognize, are what I call the warm fuzzies. The warm fuzzies, and all of these names come from a particular something that happened in my life. The hardcore comes from Pink Floyd, The Wall, where you've got this person, Bob Geldof, sitting inside the wall, and you see this wall around him that's just up forever. It's an image, a vivid image. My brain works very much images. That's where the hardcore comes from. I told you already where the mushy comes from, the king without his clothes. And the warm fuzzies come from a John Denver song, Grandmother's Featherbed. And he sings this song where the kids go and flop into this grandmother's feather bed that was made of goose down. And it's just this warm, fluffy, fuzzy thing, and everybody falls asleep in it. Well, that's the facade that the warm fuzzies create. They love, as opposed to the other two groups that much prefer to be by themselves, they hide in the crowd. They're always there for you. They're always these wonderful people. Everyone's attracted to them. They have these personalities that you can just flop into. But it's actually their facade. It's not who they are. And they have this warm, fuzzy, camouflage facade that protects you from ever getting to know who they are. So they know about everybody. They're warm. They light up. They're often comedians. They light up everybody's life. They're the people that ask you about everything. They just so warm and fuzzy to be around, but you never get to know them. And that's the camouflage for having a weak core. The strongest personality type is a strong core with a warm, fuzzy facade. And that, by the way, is my wife, Janae. If anybody knows her, that's who she is. The rarest commodity. And I'm such a lucky human being to find that. I'm hardcore weak is my background. But the warm fuzzies, even we practitioners get trapped in that warm fuzzy wall. You have to be able to climb over that and connect with the core of the person. And that can be very difficult, because they hate to talk about themselves. They're always talking about everybody else. They know everybody's name. They know so much about other people. You just want to relax in their personality, and you don't want to be trapped there. So as a practitioner, understanding that people with a vulnerability to addiction, by definition, have a weak core, and they then have a learned protective mechanism. And the weaker they believe their core to be, the harder that protection mechanism is. It's either hardcore where you bounce off them, mushy where you walk all over them, or warm fuzzy where you get lost in the facade, but you never ever get to know the person, who they are. But as you can help them to strengthen their core by building up their self-esteem and their self-confidence, and being okay, being just okay instead of perfect, the less they need that facade, the better they can relate to people. That's where relationships happen. Relationships usually go wrong because people fall in love with or relate to the facade, not to the human being on the inside. You can't have a relationship if it's based on a facade. But you can have a relationship if you can part the facade or climb over it and connect with the human being on the inside. And as a practitioner, my greatest goal in helping my patients is to connect with the core and help them to understand. Sorry, folks, that's my walking partner, my dog barking. But the greatest job that I have is to be able to connect with that very weak core when I first see people, because they want their facade to be in play. And I've got to ignore how that person's facade affects me. And I've got to step over that wall and connect with that person and help them slowly over time to strengthen their core. Are we always successful? No, we're not. But if you come in as a patient to me, that's what I'm doing. I'm helping you to look into the mirror at yourself at a core level, not a facade level. Don't come in and tell me about how wonderful you used to be at college and how good you were at this. And it's who you are right now and who you're going to be. I have to connect with your core in order to help you. Most often it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the facade is so intense that it shuts us out. Or we may have that transient connection, and then because I saw how weak that facade was, that core was, the facade comes in and says, "No, you don't understand." That's okay. That's okay. But once you understand this and you're able to connect, identify who you are, personality-wise, what's my facade? And why is that facade so important to me? Then you can begin to do the hard evolutionary work on the core. And the coolest people out there are the people with strong cores. There are not many of them out there. More and more, as our society, as our environment pressurizes us to be inadequate, to not be good enough, the less and less we parents raise our children with a strong core. And there'll be more about this in other videos. How do you raise a child to have a strong core? How do you raise a child to have self-confidence? How do you create self-esteem and self-confidence in somebody? It's the return on the investment of effort. But that's what you get when you come and visit with me. And as your core strengthens, you don't need crystal meth to make you feel better anymore. You don't need carbohydrates because you have who you are. And the more you can lean into yourself as your own support system, the more you gather true friends, true relationships around you, the more emotionally buoyant you will be by what you do rather than need the consumption or an addictive behavior to give you that artificial buoyancy. Deep stuff. I know there's lots of psychologists and psych people out there. I'd love to get your feedback on this. This is not written anywhere, folks. But this is what I do every day when I encounter my patients. And if I'm not on a particular day and I miss this, I've not done my job. If I've made you think, I've done my job. And if you've enjoyed the segment and you take it for a walk with your dog, like I'm going to do in a few minutes, and you think this through, and you like what we've done, hit the subscribe button. Or join us on Patreon, become a sustainer on Patreon. We really, really value that. Thanks so much.